put up or shut up. Come on. Show your 109,000 subscribers why you're correct and I'm incorrect. I explained in a video earlier how the earth had water inside it once, and God split the earth open at the mid-oceanic ridges, and this, because of the extreme pressure of the crust of the earth bearing down upon this water, when the earth split open, the water ejected at supersonic velocity, enough velocity that it would escape the earth, as a matter of fact, and now that's why we have comets, and that's why there is ice meteors that have pelted the moon.
Yeah, that's right, Neffy, and I previously showed you how this was impossible without violating conservation of energy. But why would a creation scientist let something as fleeting and facile as one of the foundational concepts of physics, you know, the physics that can collide hydrogen nuclei, something about a billionth of the size of a speck of dust, at about 1 part in a million below the speed of light? Yeah, why would a creation scientist let that get in the way of his pointless speculations based on some Bronze Age ramblings from some desert nomad goat herders, which state things like you can cure leprosy by killing birds?
But the inside of the column of water wouldn't have been affected this way, and it would have passed through itself like a pipe at supersonic speeds, like a superliquid, and shot straight through the atmosphere of the earth into outer space, where it froze into rocks made of ice, dirty rocks made of ice, and carrying elements of the earth inside the earth with it, like iridium. And that is why there is such thing as a K2 boundary today, which evolutionists claim was caused by a meteoric impact.
Stop. Did I get you right that not only did the Earth ejaculate all of this water and cause the craters on the moon, but it also deposited iridium in, what did you call it, a K2 boundary? Well, let's start with the obvious stuff here, Neffy. In geology, there is no such thing as a K2 boundary. K2 is a mountain on the border between China and Pakistan. Now, there is a KT boundary, and it stands for the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Tertiary periods. Well, why not the CT boundary, I hear you ask? Well, turns out C was already taken for the Carboniferous, so it was named after the German for chalk. Yeah, that's right, the Cretaceous period is named after the large chalk deposits associated with the shallow oceans of that era. You see, in these shallow oceans, you get these microscopic shelled life forms called coccolithophores. And when they die, under the right conditions, their shells fall to the ocean floor and they create chalk. Chalk is their fossilized shells. And yeah, Neffy, this is why you get great chalk deposits in a stripe down the middle of America, because it used to be a shallow inland ocean during the Cretaceous period. But there is a KT boundary, and it is iridium rich, and it is associated with an extinction event, most notably the non-avian dinosaurs, although it's only one of many extinction events in the Earth's history.
Which evolutionists claim was caused by a meteoric impact, but was not. It was caused by the flood of Noah, because materials inside the earth like iridium were shot out of the earth with this water and came down upon the entire earth in a torrential rain, creating a layer of iridium around the earth. And that's why we have what's called a K2 boundary. It has nothing to do with a meteor impact. It was caused by the flood.
It does really seem that at this point Neffy is arguing that only the iridium-rich K2 boundary was deposited by Noah's flood, and quite how Neffy gets this to be consistent with geology is a bit of a mystery. You know, all those dinosaurs patiently left their fossils below the KT boundary, but oddly enough not one single bunny did. And then the mammals started leaving their fossils in a terribly organized fashion only after Noah's flood puts down the K2 boundary. As for the iridium coming from the Earth's crust during Noah's flood, afraid not, Neffy. You see, there's a reason why the Earth's crust is so depleted of iridium, which is curiously the same reason that it's so common in iron-rich meteors. You see, you get a lot of energy out of gravitational accretion, and along with a little radioactivity, that's enough to give you a molten planetoid. After that, the dense immiscible stuff sinks. That's basically your iron and your nickel. And the less dense stuff, that's basically your rocks, float. But chemistry being what it is, turns out that iridium dissolves very well in iron. So basically, as the iron sinks to the planet's core, it takes with it the iridium. And yeah, this is why the Earth looks the way that it does, with a iridium-poor crust with a iron-rich core. So where do these iridium iron-rich meteors come from? Well, early in the solar system there was a few dozen larger asteroids, things that generated enough heat and accretion to become molten and phase-separate in a similar fashion to that of the Earth. But because they were relatively small, they lost their heat relatively rapidly to space. Well, at least on a geological timescale. I mean, we're still talking thousands to millions of years, which is conversely an extremely slow chemical timescale. And so these slowly cooling iron cores, in many cases, crystallized. Then over the millennia these smaller bodies were shattered by collisions with other such bodies, and portions of their iron and iridium-rich cores were flung out into space. And occasionally these things actually have found their way to Earth. And from the chemical signatures of these meteorites we've worked out that there were only maybe 50 or so such bodies. And it was a similar meteor to this that struck the Yucatan Peninsula at the end of the Cretaceous period, throwing megatons of iridium-rich material into the atmosphere, screwing over a large portion of life on Earth, and of course depositing, well, at least everywhere there was sedimentary rocks being laid down at the time, and iridium-rich layer, which gives us the KT boundary. But I'm afraid it's worse than that, because this guy claims that the water that froze to form comets and caused the flood came from within the Earth. That is, it came from a common source.
The Earth had water inside it once, and God split the Earth open at the mid-oceanic ridges, and this, because of the extreme pressure of the crust of the Earth bearing down upon this water, when the Earth split open, the water ejected at supersonic velocity, enough velocity that it would escape the Earth, as a matter of fact, and now that's why we have comets.
You see, the problem there is that comets more chemically reflect their extraterrestrial origins. But let's be fair and entertain this creationist concept for a moment that Noah's flood had the same elemental composition as the comets. Well, you see, one of the more offensive compounds found in, say for instance, Halley's Comet is cyanide. Well, only 1 part in 1,000, but that's enough that drinking between 1 cup and 1 litre of such water would be fatal. But actually, megatons of cyanide-laced water would have been the least of Noah's concerns. You see, comets have some 10% carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide, unlike cyanide, has lousy solubility in water and would simply degas. Now, carbon monoxide has some interesting properties. It sticks very strongly to hemoglobin, and when it does so essentially irreversibly, and that makes your hemoglobin go very red. Indeed, they use the stuff in meat plants to make the meat appear redder. It's just a aesthetic sales type thing to stop the meat from looking brown. Now, when CO sticks to your hemoglobin, it precludes its biological function to carry oxygen, which eventually leads to oxygen starvation and death. So how toxic is carbon monoxide? Well, merely at 1% concentration, carbon monoxide causes unconsciousness after a few breaths, and death within a few minutes. So how much of Noah's cometary floodwater, which according to Nephi is some 10% carbon monoxide, would be required to produce this concentration in the Earth's atmosphere? Well, ballpark numbers. Going by mass, atmospheric pressure is equal to about 10 meters of water. So let's say that we've got 1 meter of Nephi's floodwater, and this gives us a pressure of about 1/10 of an atmosphere. And of course that water is about 1/10 by mass carbon monoxide, which essentially gives you this instantly fatal concentration of carbon monoxide. So in summary, Neff, if Noah's flood had had cometary composition, no one would have lived long enough to drown. And if God had wanted Noah to survive, he would have instructed him to build a breathing apparatus and a terraforming plant rather than a boat. And then, after all this, he has the gall to actually chastise other people for not getting his brilliant ideas. By the way, comets are typically high in iridium. No, Neff, comets are rich in water. It's only the iron-rich meteors that have monstrous levels of iridium, an element that is found in the K2 boundary. No, Neff, it's the KT boundary. K2 is a mountain, which was created by the flood, because comets are from the same water as the flood. Actually, Neff, if that were true, it would have gassed all life on Earth, whether they were in a boat or no, long before anything even thought about drowning. And yeah, he really does go on to sign off with, keep thinking, you might just get there eventually. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is just some crazy loser. But no, he's essentially parroting a big creationist's ideas, which, at least in his mind, he thinks that real scientists have been struggling to debunk.
The atheist camp is desperately trying to refute this. This is a part of Walt Brown's hydroplate theory.
So is this just some lone crazy guy? Far from it. These ideas find themselves on places like Answers in Genesis that has a budget of some $14 million per year. Indeed, this is their animation of the flood, and it plays in their creation museum. And it wonderfully shows how the flood kills all those sinful children playing board games and all those sinful people in some arable market. You see, the only difference is that this guy is crazy enough to try and defend such jaw-droppingly stupid ideas in public. Answers in Genesis is just not that stupid. They keep away from the public forum, and they seem to be more in the game of selling magic beans to the believers. How could I possibly say such slanderous things? Well, my suspicions were first aroused when I clicked on support on their website. You find that giving them money is clearly more important to them than petitioning their all-powerful, ultra-uber magic skydaddy who can do absolutely anything on their behalf. And I'll be honest, from my chair that kinda looks like Answers in Genesis cares more about finances than faith.
Put up or shut up. Come on. Show your 109,000 subscribers why you're correct and I'm incorrect.